At this point, I'm like, there is not another theory that answers everything as well as this theory does. So I'm still sticking with it until somebody else comes up with something better. And I'm like, I hope they do.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Midnight Mormons. I am your host, Cardin Ellis, and today I am joined in the studio with Kwaku L, Brad Whitbeck, and Leo Weiniger, as well as on Zoom with none other than Justin Griffin, the now documentary filmmaker of the flick Who Killed Joseph Smith. I see the logo behind you, man. That's really good branding right there. You know what I'm saying? And he's got some audacious claims that we were gobbling up via YouTube before they took it down. I got re-put up and then taken down again and then re-put up again. But find the link. We'll post it if we can. Go watch it. If I can summarize the film, Justin, and the claims that are making a lot of noise, you guys have suggested that in Carthage, Joseph Smith was murdered not by the mob, which is the narrative that all of us are familiar with, okay, but by John Taylor and Willard Richards in cahoots with Brigham Young and the mob, because they wanted to usher in a polygamy that Joseph Smith was against. So they actually kind of shot Hiram and Joseph in the back, for lack of a better term, even though it was technically in the chin, according to your death mask analysis. But they got shot in the back by leaders of the church that wanted to usher in polygamy, and not by the face-painted mob outside, as we have traditionally been led to believe. Is that a fair analysis?
Yes, except I didn't talk about motivation in the movie at all.
Yeah, they didn't mention that.
And
In fact, that was part of my question.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Also, Brigham Young wasn't mentioned, if I'm correct, in the movie either.
Yeah, he wasn't mentioned at all.
So I'm mixing our So I'm mixing up our speech with Jacob Isbell.
Yeah,
I guess. Okay, cool. So then, yes. So you correct me now. Correct me, Justin.
Yeah. So all of that was correct, except I didn't mention Brigham Young and I didn't talk about his motivation at all.
Okay, cool, sweet. Then tell us about your film. We'll just start right there. I shouldn't even made that intro. Tell us about your film, my man.
Okay, so it started off with, I don't know if you guys, as members of the church, have had any friends or family or neighbors that left the church because they started hearing stories about Joseph and polygamy and, 14-year-old girls and just some pretty wild stuff, and they couldn't handle that and threw everything out, basically. That happened to me like a number of times. And, I told all the stories, no, he's a prophet, everything's good. But I decided I have to know more than that. I have to figure out what really happened here for myself. So I started looking into that. And when you really start diving into that online, especially, you run into people who say Joseph never practiced polygamy. And you've never heard of that before, and it kind of throws you for a loop. So I started studying that from every angle that I could. And then I came across a video called Carthage Conspiracy on YouTube. And that was the first video, or first time anyone suggested to me that the story of Carthage might not be what we thought. And they are the first that I know of that said Joseph was killed by John Taylor and Willard Richards. So I wanted to know if that could possibly be true. So I started looking into it. And then I had dinner with my friend Steve one night. He's the filmmaker. And we were talking about different ideas. And he was like, I really want to do a film on Carthage. And I was like, man, I'm looking into Carthage right now. That would be amazing. So I started studying everything about Carthage to see, could this Carthage Conspiracy film be possible at all? And I realized really quickly it couldn't. The theory that they put forward is fairly easy to debunk. But I was hooked after that because they asked so many good questions. And I wanted to answer all of those questions. And so I studied everything you could get about Carthage. And after a year of doing that, I mean, I've put thousands of hours into it, which sounds crazy, but that's how it played out.
Nah, dude, we probably put thousands of hours into this, man. So it's a labor of
Okay.
love, brother. I believe you. I
get it.
believe you.
We get it.
So where I'm an expert is in the 2 to 3 minutes of the actual martyrdom in the jail. Where I'm not an expert is everything before and everything after. I didn't put motivation in the film because I didn't feel qualified to. I mean, there's thousands of people that are so much better at that than I am, that have gone through both sides. So I would like to do that someday, but that is a huge, huge project to be able to put all that together into a, something that would make sense. So I just left it out and I talked about that 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, well, outside of the film, do you share the same opinion as Jacob Isbell, who he had previously interviewed, that the reason why, because in the film you do make the claim that John Taylor's and Willard Richards did it.
Yeah.
If Carthage were a game of Clue, they did it with a pepper box in the second room. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, and it wasn't the mob. You don't state what you believe the motivations were in the film, but as we have slowly started to be able to catch up with a lot of other members of your movement and have some of these deeper conversations, a common thread has been the belief that those who would become the polygamists were the one pushing this and responsible for it. So would you say it's fair that outside of the context of the movie, you agree with them, that you think it was Brigham Young, Willard Richards, and John Taylor in cahoots with the mob in order to usher in polygamy?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I also think it's money and power. It's the age-old motivations.
All right. Cool. This just got intriguing, man.
And what would be the evidence that you have for that with the money and power and that sort of... Oh, he's gone. Oh, no. I asked the wrong question. He's disappeared.
Do we lose you?
Sorry about that.
Was it a
technical difficulties?
Battery issue or something?
Was it your battery? We were guessing
we
it was
had
your
a
battery.
go out. Yep.
Cool.
We were joking that like it looked like you hung up because you'd moved your hand right before it went green. And we said we could just clip that and make it look like you hung up and put that online and just be like, Justin Griffin wrecked.
They're too difficult. I didn't want to look bad. So.
On question 2. He's like, oh, never mind, I'm out.
That's actually pretty funny. All right, so I forgot what the question was. Okay.
It was talking about motivations
yeah.
being money and power. I was curious. So what kind of evidence are you basing that off of? Like what gives you the idea that for John Taylor and Willard Richards, it was money and power? And
okay, so I mean, I've talked with several experts who that's their field. Okay, so this is me repeating what I'm learning as I'm diving into motivation, but I'm not ready to make a definitive stand. Like in the movie, I'm really confident in my theory that it's the closest to the truth that exists today. But on the motivation, I'm not. If that makes sense. What actually was the motivation? I'm not there yet. I'd like to get there, but I'm not. So one of the things, for example, is, have you been to Nauvoo before?
Not personally.
I have, yeah.
Okay, you know where you go down on Main Street and they have all the brick houses and everything?
Well, all the houses were brick in Nauvoo that I remember.
No.
But...
Into today, when you go down there and you see the old Nauvoo and the houses and everything.
Okay, yeah.
Like how many houses would you say are there?
Geez, man.
Like 100?
100? Yeah, I was gonna say a couple. Yeah. I was gonna say a couple hundred, maybe, but that's only because
couple hundred. Yeah.
Okay.
And I was like, what's going on here? Because at the peak of Nauvoo, I believe they were at about 12 to 15,000 population.
Okay.
So I was like, how you fitting 15,000 people in a couple hundred houses here? And they were like, the guides were like, mostly the houses were tents and lean-tos and shanties and digging pits in the ground. It was super poor people that were pouring into Nauvoo, which, I guess that makes a lot of sense. But after the martyrdom, suddenly Brigham's house and John Taylor's houses and Willard's houses become these huge mansions. And that's always been a point of concern for certain people who look at that history, is why are their houses all of a sudden so big? Everyone else is dirt poor. What are they doing building these mansions? So you've seen John Taylor's. It's pretty big for everything there.
Well, he was a distinguished Englishman.
So again, that's one of the pieces of evidence. What that means, I don't know, but it's stuff like that, if that makes sense. And then later on, Brigham becomes the wealthiest man west of the Mississippi. And again, he's doing that in Utah when there's just thousands and thousands of super dirt poor saints pouring into that area. So that contrast makes you ask questions, if that makes sense.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So, you say that maybe you don't have a smoking gun in terms of an original document, like a journal entry that says, I shot Joseph Smith. But you say there's a lot of evidences contrasting the wealth of who would become leaders after Joseph Smith with those who were the followers after Joseph Smith that might have suggested there were financial motivations behind what is now the assassination of Joseph Smith and not the martyrdom of Joseph Smith, right?
Yeah, I put the movie out to say, hey, here's what happened in the 2 or 3 minutes. But you have people who watched it who didn't see this coming at all. What theory I was going to put forward.
Oh, dude, I didn't. I thought, I was like, woo, this is blowing my hair back.
And one of the reasons why they refuse to consider it is because they believe that John Taylor and Willard Richards are like revered men. One of them became a prophet. And that's a hard, you can't get past that just by watching a movie. They're like, why on earth would they do that? What is their motivation? So that's when I was like, I saw that reaction so many times. I was like, yeah, I probably can't. This isn't the whole story. We're going to have to go into motive. So
okay,
I've been researching that. So
okay, so now you're researching the motives, but you say that you're an expert in those 2 to 3 minutes of the assassination. Now, we were a little bit dubious about some of these claims. I'll be honest. Some of them I actually thought were very eye-opening, and I was amazed at your research. Like, you guys, first and foremost, I'm going to say 2 things that I absolutely love about this film. First, I love you because you talk like a Ninja Turtle and the van from Cars, and you remind me of all the buddies I grew up with in the 90s in Southern California. You know what I'm saying? I just love the way you talk. You're like, this can't be right, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. And it's just awesome. You are a great interlocutor, and you should be in more documentaries, all right?
All right, great. Thanks.
Yeah, when we do a Point Break 3, I'm calling you up, bro. And then second is you guys did a lot of due diligence here. I mean, I've seen bigger budget documentaries with less on the groundwork. You guys went to Carthage, you measured the angles, saying how could a person from this distance make a 15-degree shot? You know, how could this, how could that? You went to all the libraries. I mean, you did a lot of due diligence, and I have respect for that. Now, with that said, there were some things that I was looking at, I was like, I don't know if I could have interpreted that. And a lot of it had to do with the ballistics analysis. So let's start out with what your claim is of the actual, not shootout at the OK Corral. What are we going to call this? The shootout at Carthage. What's basically summarize the claims in the film of how the traditional narrative can't be true according to the forensics you found. And then Brad's got some questions with us on some of these ballistics things. Go.
Okay, so the main problem with the ballistics, well, there's 2 problems. First of all, if he was hit in the side of the face with a musket from that time period, most people assume that that would have caused much more damage. Secondly, if it didn't cause more damage on the entry, then the power of the musket would have been through penetration, meaning it should have created an exit out of the back of the skull. There was 2 shots to his head, one to the left of his nose and one below his chin. So there should have been 2 exit wounds, one on the top and one on the back. And that didn't happen. So that's one of the biggest questions that, you know, people who look into this are asking is, how is it possible he could have been shot and there wasn't more damage to that skull? So I'm no ballistics expert, that's for sure. And I couldn't come up with an 1816 musket that was safe to shoot. So all I could do was simulate that as best as I could. And when I talked with other guys who've, you know, like Sam Weston, he has like 1 million boards that he's shot with his simulations and you know, I went the rounds with them and we all agree there should have been more damage. Why wasn't there? And he's like, well, you don't know. You're flustered in the moment. You could have missed putting gunpowder in. And I was tired of that argument. So I'm like, I'm going to do less gunpowder just to see what happens. And I really thought with that ballistic head that it was going to penetrate and I was going to be able to prove, look, This should have been a hole through the back of the head. And the first shot blew it apart. There was nothing left. There was nothing left. I was going to shoot through the front and through the bottom just to see if I could get exits through the back of the head and the top of the head. Both times completely destroyed it. And looking at Steve, I was just like, man, there's no way he was shot in the face with a musket. After we witnessed our little test, there's no way. And I've had, after the movie, so many different ballistic guys contact me and say, you should have done this, you should have done that. And my favorite is and I'm like, okay, suppose I did that, what would be the outcome? And they're like, pretty much the same thing as you got.
So
okay.
I have one
All right,
question.
all right.
I have one question for you on that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when I watched the film, it seemed to rely on the account of John Taylor and Willard Richards that the mobsmen had muskets, and I'm wondering, if I'm in a room and I know that there are people coming, there's a mob outside and there's a mob in the hallway, the first two glimpses of the gun I'm going to see through the door may be muskets, but do you at all think it's possible that there was any other kind of gun that they also had, such as a pistol, which could create those holes that you talk about?
Absolutely. I think that's a possibility. And that's one of the things I wanted to set out to say. But that's the problem, is why didn't the eyewitnesses ever? I mean, he mentioned all muskets. They both did, and went out the window and it was all muskets with bayonets. So right off the bat, that's one of those inconsistencies that you've got to come up with. Okay, why is that the case? But do I believe that mob members could have brought pistols or rifles? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, did they say in the, I haven't read the account the same way you have, right? But did they say only muskets, or what they?
Because that seemed, I know this seems like.
No, they didn't say there was only, they didn't say the word only, but they only mentioned muskets. They said it was all muskets sticking through the door with their big blasts, and they all have bayonets. In the film, I put the actual quotes up.
Yeah. I guess
where they described that it was musket.
So something that I was wondering about, because I've read the records relatively recently, and something that I was wondering about was like, how much are we expecting of John Taylor and Willard Richards, who were literally in this room, assuming that they were actually being attacked by the mob and being shot at by the mob, like they claim to have been. What level of accuracy are we expecting out of them when they're like under attack, literally being shot by a mob? Like what level of accuracy are we expecting from them? Because you're saying they're inconsistent.
That's a great question.
Yeah,
that's a great question. And I'm not. After I reviewed and seen the inconsistencies, I'm like, okay, these eyewitness testimonies are not credible, which is why I focused most of my research on the actual physical evidence.
Okay.
It's harder to learn from
and the physical evidence. Yeah. So, and just for viewers that haven't been able to see the film yet, the physical evidence that you're referencing is the famous death mask of Joseph Smith that shows that there's a piercing right here underneath the cheek and next to the nose.
On Hiram, yeah.
On Hiram Smith. Right. And because of a lack of exit holes on the back.
Also, we have pictures of the skull.
They were dug up by the RLDS church in the 70s, right?
That's right. Yeah. We have pictures of both of their skulls, huge piece of evidence, and we have Hiram's clothing, and then we have still the crime scene, and then we have the watch. So between all of those,
so I just want to clear this with you, because these are some things that stuck out of my mind right away. You seem to make a big deal about the fact that they didn't mention pistols, but they had mentioned muskets, and in my mind, I'm like, dude, I watched guys go every day as a radio host in Los Angeles. I've seen ad nauseum other radio hosts go into the street and say, what does AR-15 stand for? And they say like, oh, assault rifle 15. No, it's actually Armalite rifle. You know what I'm saying? Like most people can't even name the founding fathers, who the current president is, or their two state senators, let alone identify properly weaponry of their day. So if there's some primary sources that misrepresent pistols as muskets, to me that's completely within the realm of regular margin of error in terms of historical accounting, right?
Again, I agree with you,
Okay.
As you remember from the film, I say it was pistols.
Okay, cool. Rock on. And then the second one is, I know that you have pictures of the skulls, and they were dug up in the 70s by the reorganized?
No, early 1900s.
Early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
Like about 50 years later, I assume, after he was buried,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
Yeah.
So, in the early 1900s, the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints reinters the body, takes pictures of the skull. There was a lot of decay, though, okay?
Yes.
And if he was shot through the nose, it would be leaving through the rear of the spinal column, which would cause nearly instantaneous death for all of us that saw that awesome scene in the remake of Miami Vice. Okay. And second off, that to me, in my mind, that's one of the first areas that does decay, is one of the thinnest areas of the skull, is in the seams in the back. So couldn't the absence of an exit wound be due to decay of time, 50 years under the soil, instead of...
You can still see the full back and top of the skull. They haven't decayed. The sides have decayed, and you can see that the upper jawbone is decayed. But on Hiram, the whole thing, the whole back and top are still there.
I think Cardin's talking about like the very bottom of the back of his skull, right? Right where you're...
Yeah, because if you're leaning down and your head's down because you're pushing up against the door, which is the
Here's
claim.
what's interesting about that.
Okay.
You can look at the skull. So Hiram wasn't actually hit in the bone here. It was the side of the nose, which you can see on the death mask, which is a really weird shot because you would think you'd have to be turned sideways. And if you got turned sideways and hit through the nose, it for sure should have blown his nose off and didn't. So how is he hit in the side of the nose? If you look at the skull, there's no damage. There's not even a dent where the ball would have bounced off. There's certainly not a hole where that ball would have penetrated. It went downward. The skull is the missing piece of evidence. You look at the skull, it tells you the bullet path. It shows you where it went. And it could not have been straight on. Not like the eyewitnesses explained, it couldn't have been through that bullet hole in the door.
Huh. Okay.
I guess it was just
Like
hard
I
for me.
can
Like
show you on an actual skull if you want to see.
Oh, now
cool,
it's
yeah.
now we're going straight Hamlet.
Sweet.
So it doesn't get any better than
you
this.
just have Hiram's skull right here.
Now we're straight NCIS, dog. All right, so keep going.
So he was shot right here. So if he was shot straight forward with a musket, with a pistol, with a rifle, I don't care, whatever. If that was the shot that killed him, you would think there'd be some sort of damage in the nasal cavity or along this ridge. There's nothing. There's nothing. The damage is all downwards because this whole upper jawbone is what's missing.
Well, yeah, but
So
doesn't
that's
that make
how-
sense? Let's just say you're really pushing on that door. You're yelling at your friends side to side. Smack down the doorknob, do this. Oh, is there somebody behind you? There's a million and one places. We say in martial arts, head on a swivel, right? So you're pushing up against this door. You might be leaning into it with your body, but there's some kind of forward motion that might make you go down. I could see an aggressive male who's very strong enough to make it into the world, not the World Wrestling Hall of Fame. Sorry, he wasn't with Hulk Hogan.
You're thinking leg wrestling.
Yeah, the Wrestling Hall of Fame or whatever it was. You know,
No, this is Hiram, remember.
Sorry.
Joseph.
Well, both of them I know were oftentimes competitive, and there's multiple accounts of them both being wrestlers. But let's say able-bodied males, for lack of a better term. Okay, so you got two totally able-bodied males, all right, that are pushing up against this thing in this door. And yes, you're right. Specifically, notably, we're talking about Hiram. All right.
Right.
If you're aggressively trying to assist, especially in an odd position, maybe around one of your comrades or to the side of one of your comrades or whatever, okay, I could see you down in a position where if you got shot through the door, first off, not only is there a ricochet from the door material, but second off, if it is coming downward, I could see it exiting below your chin, through your face, through the side here, in a million places where bones don't even connect. I mean, we see soldiers that are shot through the mouth all the time. I've met dudes that have been shot through the cavities of their teeth, and the only thing they're missing are their freaking molars. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, to me, it's not definitive.
No damage. There's no damage up here. The only damage is this upper mandible. So that's the Lyon brothers. One of them was a doctor. And he's the one that said, yeah, you can't shoot back. You'd hit that spinal cord. You'd hit the bottom of the base of the brain where language comes from. And he couldn't have said anything. So they're the ones that came up with the idea that it entered and went downward. And that's where that neck wound
Okay,
came
so I
from.
think what would lay this
that
argument...
matches the evidence way better.
I think what would lay this argument to rest would be if we could get a hold of the skull. Where's the skull? Is this like hunting Hitler where the Russians said they had it for 70 years?
It's buried in Nauvoo. So that's nice.
So they did reinter it indeed. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I don't
the
think
next
so.
film needs to be.
I
a
think they
national
encased
treasure.
it.
We have full video. We have full pictures of the whole skull in every angle. So you don't even need to dig it up to see what I'm talking about.
Okay.
The damage is not there from a straight-on shot or a
I guess
ricochet to the. None of that would can hold up.
The question that I had was, you guys seemed to gloss past the head position of Hiram pretty quickly in the movie. Like, you just said, like, hey, if he walked up against the door, it would look kind of like this, but then didn't go through, like Carden was just talking about, the analysis level of like where he could have been looking, or what, I mean, the witness accounts talk about how he was shot under the chin after he fell back, right? Or how that aligned. I guess it just felt like you kind of skipped a couple of ways that the witness accounts could align with the evidence. And so I was curious if there was what was the purpose in laying it out? Was it just to go through the multiple theories in the same order, or what was the purpose there?
Okay, I'm not sure I understood your question.
Yeah, I got a little bit lost there too, Brad.
So okay, let me just make it simple. I just felt like you didn't spend very much time on Hiram's head position. It just kind of came across as very, very much like assumed that his head couldn't have been in any other position other than like he went up against the door like this, right?
So this isn't the only skull I have. I have the whole thing skeleton hanging, and I've put it in every position possible to figure out the angle, if it came through that door, how that possibly could have happened. So, but first on the list that we're trying to test for is the eyewitness accounts, which both said Hiram was standing 10 feet back from the door when he was shot, 2/3 of the length of the room. And that angle from the bullet, because it was going 5 degrees down, that was impossible. So pretty much everybody agrees with this now, that Hiram was not 10 feet back. And most people say, no, he had to have been up against the door when that shot was made. Are you guys with me on that?
Yeah,
Or
we
do you wanna talk
understand.
more about
Okay.
the 10 feet. Okay. So for instance, in the first volume of Saints, if you read the account of the martyrdom in there, first of all, you can see Hiram's hands are against the door when the bullet comes through, and you read the account, he's at the door when he's shot. So the church has also agreed the 10 feet doesn't work, so they moved him to the door. The Lyons brothers agree, moved him to the door. Gary Smith agrees, moved him to the door. I think most researchers agree he's at the door. I don't agree with that, but whatever. I was willing to look at it and say why they thought that. Now, if he's at the door, it is a super weird angle for about a 5. I got this wrong in the film. It was 6. I said that Hiram was 6'2", and some guy came in, showed me all this stuff. No, Hiram is 5'10", and I was like, great. I messed up that detail. Thank you for correcting me. But that didn't change that it's difficult to get in a position against the door to be shot in the face. Because remember, they say he enters here and exits here. So it's a super steep angle. And the problem with the Lyons brothers theory, because they're the ones there's the one that came up with the one shot, is they say he was leaning at the door. Your head has to be almost parallel to the floor. And there is no possible angle where the bullet can enter here, exit here, and not hit you somewhere else in the body.
But this was something that was even brought up by one of the guys that you were interviewing in the film. He talked about how with a smoothbore musket and a round ball, once it hits something, often the angle doesn't matter anymore, right? Because a round ball like that, often made of like pewter, could just deform so much that it's going to change its angle pretty drastically compared to like modern rifles, right?
But remember what I said. The skull shows the bullet path. The 2 wounds tell the bullet path. We know it entered and we know where it exited. So you can draw that line and assume. Now, when it came out of him, yeah, it should have followed that line. And you can move his head in any possible angle. All of them would have struck the body somewhere.
But doesn't
if
it
he
being,
was leaning down on that shot?
But doesn't it being a round ball from a smoothbore musket make it so that those lines don't matter so much?
Okay, well, maybe so. And I agree with you that the ball should deform a little bit when it comes through the door. So if it was a musket ball, the hole in the door is smaller than a 69 caliber musket ball, which means it should have deformed a little bit if it was a musket ball. But when it hit the nose and it exited here, you tell me where else could that have gone? I'm open to hearing your theory on that.
Well, okay. Well, actually, I will return your question with a question as well, just because we're kind of taking a holistic view at the of the analysis of these forensics. You're suggesting that, just so our viewers know that haven't seen the movie yet, you're suggesting that this evidence we've mentioned, whether it's the bullet hole and the death mask of Hiram Smith or the analysis of the skull dug up 50 years later, that Hiram Smith wasn't shot through the door coming down through the face by the mob, but was shot from a pistol placed under his chin by a friendly, John Taylor or Willard Richards, that used a pistol to sabotage him and shot him through the chin where it exited out the nose. And that explains the pattern of the musket ball more. Well, here's my question. Just like you say, well, if he was really shot downward like this, it should have ended up in his body. We have the hole in the door from the musket shot. Is there a hole in the roof from the pistol shot that went through the chin, up the nose? Like, wouldn't the ball from your theory have been lodged in the rafters? Or was there just too much arson from the day?
Great question.
You know what I'm saying? Okay.
So my answer to that is the earliest drawing we have of the crime scene came from Piercy. And Piercy was traveling from England to Salt Lake and drawing pictures of everything to track church history along the way, stopped at Carthage, and he made a drawing. And you can see bullet holes in the wrong place. They're on the side with the door. If the muskets were pointing through the door, they should have all been on the other wall where the window is, but they weren't. They were there in that wall. But so that's an interesting question. But if you look up, he has a bullet hole in the ceiling. I didn't even realize that until the very end of the film. And we were looking at that, someone pointed out, and I'm like, what the heck? So in the credits, we put it in there and highlighted. You can see in his drawing, there is a hole in the ceiling.
Oh, great. So I just alley-ooped you. You're welcome, bro.
Yes, thank you.
You know, you're welcome, man. So anyway,
Right.
We can put that all to rest with simply the recommendation that our viewers need to go watch the documentary as a whole, because we obviously can't do justice just speaking mano to mano here on Zoom like you do to your claims on video with different graphs and illustrations and ballistic performances and so on and so forth. My question is, it keeps getting taken down off YouTube. Apparently there's an artist that is claiming that you're not using fair use correctly when you're analyzing the positioning of Hiram and Joseph Smith in a painting, which I find totally unfair. And I think you should fight it because you did a great job making the film. How can people watch this so they can see what your claim is?
Just go to whokilledjosephsmith.com.
And you've got it up there, and people can just watch whokilledjosephsmith.com.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Do you have any more questions about the film before we talk about the movement at large, guys? Any other questions?
I had a couple of questions.
Hit
about,
'em.
Like, so with Hiram Smith, you made a big deal about them having washed the lower part of his clothes, but not the upper part of his clothes. And I was just curious about that from your perspective. You talked about how, or you mentioned in the film, was it that they hadn't washed the clothes?
That's right. If you go to the museum, or actually the museum doesn't show the shirt, but I show all of the pictures in the film. Up here is where all the blood is on his shirt, but there's no blood in the back wound or in his pant where he was wounded in his legs. There's no blood in the pants or the underpants under. And so it's like, well, that's really crazy. How could that be possible? And the Lyons brothers put forth the theory, because they say that's a weakness of their theory, because they say he was shot in the nose, exited the chin. He stood up and said, "I'm a dead man," and turned around. And then a gun through the door shot him in the back, flipped him back around. And that's when he went on the floor. But they're like, there should have been blood in his clothes because he hadn't had enough time to bleed out yet. So they came up with the theory that his family washed the back of his shirt and his pants and everything but the top of his shirt. And they said, I think they admitted, yeah, it's
That seems
weak.
totally fanciful. Who half cleans the blood out of their shirt?
That's pretty weak, but that was the theory that he put forth.
I don't know. I can see that though. Like, especially from like a gut wound, those stink, dude. And if he like crapped himself and like peed himself from dying, right? That's what happens when you die. If you have anything in your bowels, they were stuck in a prison, right? I could see it. Like, it's not that outlandish that they would have cleaned the lower half.
Well, Brad's got the beard for joining the remnant, so apparently you've gained another convert. Just kidding.
Brad, why wouldn't they just wash the whole shirt? Just like scrub the whole. I mean, do they want to preserve this?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe they wanted to preserve it for.
Dude, look, the USSR preserved Lenin on display all the way into like the 70s. The dead, decayed body.
Just that. Remember, that blood was in that shirt for at least 24 hours. I don't know if you've ever gotten blood in something and tried to get it out, but you got to get it out pretty quick. And if you wait, there will be a remnant. There will be something left. And
I see what you did there. There will be a remnant.
Oh, working in the movement name.
Yeah, dude, you got this down. It's like the 15 YouTube channels you guys are starting. It's good marketing. Makes you look like there's more of you than there is, So, okay, epic. Any other questions about the movie, guys?
Can I say one final thing?
Go ahead, no. Yes, of course.
I don't know how to do this without sounding prideful. And I don't mean to come across as prideful, but I've looked at this for a long time. And there is no way you're going to be able to come up with something unless you've put a substantial amount of time. You can ask questions and all of them can be, I've heard them all. What I'm looking for is people, the experts who've actually put the time into it, and we can go back and forth, and those guys challenge me and they ask things that I'm like, I don't know the answer to that, and I have to go back and rethink it. But with most people, it's like, oh, this and that, and I'm like, I know, okay, I gotta catch you up to speed so you'll know why that is or isn't a good question. All of that's fine, but really it's the ramifications of this movie that I find most interesting, discussing. So I don't know if you guys want to talk about the ramifications.
Yeah, no, you segued right into.
I guess I have a question about that. Like, there seem to be a lot of experts that don't agree with you, right? Like, they don't share your conclusion. Do you have a reason for why that is?
Yes, so that's exactly what I presented in the film. Is they're the first ones I studied. I knew nothing. I just knew the same thing as I studied every single one of them. But my original intent was to prove if Carthage Conspiracy could be real or not. I debunked it super quick. So I wanted to know, could theirs work or not? And, talking with them, they admit that they're coming from the angle of trying to prove that the eyewitness accounts could be true, or trying to preserve the story, even though they know the evidence doesn't match the eyewitness accounts. I don't have a problem with that, with their approach on it, but that forced them to shoehorn things in to a certain angle to make it fit, and I wasn't required to do that. I didn't care. I was like, whatever it tells, I just want to know what happened. I did suspect there's something weird going on here. There could be foul play here. But I didn't know, and I couldn't prove it. And I wasn't trying to make a movie. I just wanted to know. And then at the end, after going through this so much, it just wrote itself. It wrote itself. Here's all the aspects. And every one of their theories have good aspects to them. And then other parts that are like, there's no way that could be true. And I could have been that guy that just made a movie or just said, here's why none of them are true. I didn't want to be that guy just taking pot shots from the peanut galley. I knew I was going to have to come up with a theory. They all tried, they did their best, and they came up with some good stuff. And here I am taking shots at them. That isn't fair. So I was like, I have to come up with my theory. And that's where most of the time came in. And I'm telling you, if you try and come up with your own theory, that's the easiest way for me to defeat anyone with questions when they're coming at me. I'm just like, okay, fine. What do you think happened? I don't know. And I'm like, well, you can't know. It was 200 years ago. And I'm like, sure. But what do you think happened? You agree with me that the eyewitness accounts couldn't have happened. So what do you think happened? Well, I think it was the Lion Brothers. And I'm like, dude, it's so easy to disprove their theory. Let's go through that. And if you take that step, you go as far as I did with it, and you try and form your own opinion and theory about what happened, you'll see how I came up with it. I didn't come up with it out of thin air. It fits the evidence the best. I know it's not 100% accurate. And if you actually put the time into it and you challenge me and together we get closer to the truth, that's what I want. That's what I want. But at this point, I'm like, there is not another theory that answers everything as well as this theory does. So I'm still sticking with it until somebody else comes up with something better. And I'm like, I hope they do.
Okay, cool. So can we talk about the movement at large now?
Yeah.